knowing what you knew, well, knowing what we know now, the brothers don't speak. Was there any indication when you were working with them that there was this kind of sibling rivalry that would end up in a situation where two previously close brothers are basically sworn enemies?
No, I think there's this sort of breakup of sibling relationship. I think this all began really about the time of Harry's marriage to Meghan. I mean, sort of much later in life, because up until that point, certainly up until the point of their mother's death, they were very much at one. I mean, they entertained each other. They were very much involved in each other's friends. But again, right through that early part of the life, Harry was always the most popular. But to be fair to Diana and their father, there was never any preference shown. I mean, they were treated, very fairly. I remember one incident actually going down to Highgrove one weekend, which was a normal Friday night journey, and they clearly had an argument in the nursery beforehand. And as we came out of the front doors of Kensington Palace, there's the nanny, the late Olga Powell, who was, an incredibly interesting nanny of the old school, and would dish out very gentle corporal punishment. And clearly Harry and William had a barn, as I say. They get in the car, and Diana sort of said, "Look, if you carry on like this, we're not going. We stay in London. If you could just behave like this, we're not going anywhere." I think we're halfway down the M4, and they started again. And there's Olga sat in the middle of the back seat, refereeing this argument. And then suddenly, Harry turns across to William. He said, "It's all right for you," he said. "You'll be king one day and you can do what you want. And furthermore," he said, "I'll do what I want." And I looked at Diana, I was in the front seat, and she looked at me and she said, "Where the hell did he get that from?" And, it was funny, but I always thought interesting that children at that age, that he could have a thought process at that age to say to his brother, who he knew would be king, and William thought, he knew he would be king at some point. We're talking a 6, 7-year-old talking to his brother 4 or 5. But anyway, we didn't go back to London, but quite interesting.
Mm. What do you think? So Diana was sat in the car with you, and she was listening to the two boys talk about that. How do you think? Is it impossible to say? But how do you think Diana would feel knowing that these two previously close brothers are basically at war?
Yeah, I think the sad thing is that of Diana's death. Now, that was a traumatic experience, certainly for them. They lose their mother so publicly, and in Harry's particular case, I think it was a 13, 14-year-old, he is, out of a sense of duty, has to sort of walk behind his mother's coffin to Westminster Abbey, which is a discussion in itself.
Well, you were there, weren't you, actually, at the...
I was at Westminster Abbey, and I remember, the coffin arriving with Harry having walked nearly a mile through the royal mile, as it were, to Westminster Abbey. But up until that point, and I think even after that point, they remain good friends. And I think that, to answer your question, how would Diana have influenced, or had any influence on resolving their issues in later life? I think she would have been, because what this turmoil needed, or needs even now, I think, is someone to convene and try and sort this out. And it's never going to be sorted out publicly. It has to be sorted out privately. I think his father, the king, is desperate to resolve this issue, because I think it's very important for him. But coming back to, how would Diana resolve that? Because Diana knew that William and Harry, probably better than anybody else, would have understood the problems, would have seen the issues surrounding the complications with Harry and Meghan and all that sort of had with it at the time. Although in 2017, Harry's marriage to Meghan was probably the greatest thing that ever happened to the British royal family. Here you had a prince of the realm marrying into a woman of mixed race, a divorcee herself, and an American. And this was all supported, by the Queen, by the establishment. And sadly, it all went horribly wrong. I do think in that sense that Diana, if she were alive, would have seen all the complications, and et cetera, the complexities of that, knowing how royalty works, would have been a great motivator to try and resolve that issue, which I'm sure she would have done.
Obviously the wedding, Harry and Meghan. Do you think Diana would obviously have been delighted by Meghan? Do you think she would have welcomed Meghan? Do you think they would have been close, Diana and Meghan, with similar personalities? Or
Diana would have loved it because it was risque anyway. You know, the very fact that, you know, her son was marrying a divorcee, an American, an actress, an actor, whatever. This was all sort of food for Diana's discussion. And, you know, of course she would have liked it. You know, she was always totally supportive, always said that the most important issues in my life are my children. And for that reason would have supported them and would have been a great advisor. And let's not forget, you know, that great day at Windsor, at St. George's Chapel, you know, the Queen herself had effectively given over this piece of royal history to the great gospel choir. And then we had the visiting US priest that sort of went way beyond his allotted time, much the entertainment of the king and other people within the congregation. So this would have been very entertaining for Diana. But I do think that, you know, one of her qualities was her humane touch, and would have seen the problems that were likely to come out of that marriage. And, you know, where we are now with him and his wife and a family domiciled in the US, you know, Diana would have been, you know, a frequent visitor and would now, to this day, in my view, even work with her ex-husband, the king, to find a way to best resolve this issue. Because that's what it needs. It can now not be dealt with within the media. It has to be dealt with privately.
I remember there was talk about Princess Diana wanting to maybe move to America herself when she was alive. You know, she was quite a maverick. And I think in your book, Diana Closely Guarded Secret, it's not a memory test about your book, so I've written a little piece down. I think you described her as someone a heroine who broke free of royal bonds and changed the monarchy. Would she have supported Megxit? Would she have supported Harry saying to the royal family, "I don't want any of this. I'm taking my family abroad"? Or would she have looked at it as a bit of a betrayal to the institution that she still did love, despite all her problems?
I think what Diana would have been ahead of the game, and ahead of Harry's meeting with the late Queen in a sense, because she would have known exactly, you know, what Queen Elizabeth would say. I mean, as we know, the Queen understood completely the problems that Harry and Meghan were experiencing. They wanted, you know, they found the press an intrusion, they found the media intrusion, they valued their privacy. He couldn't find a way in the United Kingdom at that time, so therefore decided that he would leave. But he didn't realise at that point that the Queen was going to say, "Fine, we understand, but you can't have it both ways. You know, you can't do a 6 month in, a 6 month out." We don't work like that. You know, the monarchy has been running for, you know, hundreds of years. Suddenly to break out of that tradition wasn't going to work. Now, Diana would have anticipated that is exactly what the Queen would have said. And in that sense, would have said, "Well, look, you know, you've got to be careful here. I understand." But I think it would have been easier had his mother been around. Because the one thing that I think that Harry has lacked in the last 4 or 5 years, or the last 4 years, is real personal advice from close members of his family. And I think that's been part of the problem.